And now for our next guest speaker. A graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and the University of Alabama School of Law, Judge Roy Moore is a conservative Republican candidate for governor in Alabama. He's particularly known for his staunch refusal as the elected Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama to remove a monument of the Ten Commandments from the state courthouse, despite orders to do so from a federal judge. And in fact, in 2003, Chief Justice Moore was removed from his position for standing up for the inalienable right to acknowledge God. The former Chief Justice now lectures throughout the United States, teaching about America's history and our right to acknowledge God. And he serves as the president of the Foundation for Moral Law in Montgomery, Alabama. He has authored numerous works, including Religion in the Public Square, Courts Out of Control, Understanding the Rule of Law in America, and Our Legal Heritage. Judge Moore also writes a bi-weekly column, Our Moral Foundation, for WorldNetDaily.com. Please give a warm welcome to Judge Roy Moore.
Thank you. Thank you, and I want to join these candidates in thanking Ray McBerry and his staff, and especially Helga, who's helped us so much in getting here. My wife is with me here today somewhere. Kayla, are you here in the room? She's not in the room. She's outside. And Troy Hayes, one of my public relations director, are you here? Okay, back there. It's been a great honor to be here and speak, and I hope, Ray, that I'm not restricted to 3 to 5 minutes, because I'm in trouble if I am. You know, I have run for political office many times over the years, and I always thought that being honest, dedicated, and experienced were the 3 most important qualifications. And I was elected judge many years ago, and an older judge came to me and said, that's not exactly correct. You've got to have thinning or gray hair to show your age. You've got to wear glasses to show that you're learned. And finally, you have to have hemorrhoids. And I said, Judge, I've got the hair and the glasses settled, but what about the hemorrhoids? He said, well, you've got to have a concerned look. I don't think it's hard to have a concerned look today. As I travel around and speak, of course, we address the jobs, the economy, the education situation, the ethical problems we face in our state, but it always comes back to the growing power of the federal government over our lives. And invariably, people will ask me, what can we do? I'm proud that Alabama has recently joined other states, a number of states, in reaffirming the 10th Amendment sovereignty and state sovereignty under the Constitution. Known as federalism, it's a very important part of our Constitution, but it's something that many do not understand. I was at a legal seminar in Destin, Florida last summer and heard a judge retiring from the federal bench after 30 years say this. He said, then we have these people talking about states' rights, and they've even got a name for it, federalism. And I looked around at the other lawyers, and nobody blinked. And I couldn't believe that a judge after 30 years would be saying something like that. Our founding fathers had a great fear of growing centralized power. James Madison in Federalist 51 said, but what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if angels were to govern men, neither external or internal controls would be necessary. The greatest difficulty in framing a form of government is this. First, you must enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Therein lies the problem in America today. Our government is not obliged to control itself, and we must speak up. Thomas Jefferson said, in questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. To understand what our forefathers felt and motivated them about the 10th Amendment, I've gone back in history. You know, I've gone back to the Revolutionary War. In every war we have songs. You know, I was in Vietnam, and I remember the song, Those Brave Men of the Green Beret. And I remember that in the war between the states, we had the Battle Hymn of the Republic, Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory of the Coming of the Lord. And in the South, of course, we had Dixie. I wish I were back in the land of cotton. Well, every song that was in every war represents something about the feeling of the people. In the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, there was a song by the name of Chester, written by William Billings. And that song said in one of its verses, let tyrants shake their iron rods, and slavery clank her galling chains. We fear them not, we trust in God. New England's God forever reigns. Today, words like tyranny and slavery are lost in their meaning. But in 1776, the men that had signed that declaration and the soldiers that followed them, they knew what these words meant. Thomas Paine was one man who accompanied the army of Washington across New Jersey as it fled from the British. And on the head of a drum, on a cold winter night, by firelight, he wrote these words, known as the crisis, when he said, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us: the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. He went on to say, and I think that's true today, we're struggling not as men and women in our souls in this nation, but our state and our nation is struggling for its very soul for survival. He went on to say that Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has not only the right to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in such a manner is not slavery, then there's no such thing as slavery on earth. Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power belongs only to God. You see, we know that we've had enough. They had enough. And they had enough of British tyranny after the Stamp Act. And they forced Great Britain to take back that act. Great Britain did, and made one mistake that motivated that revolution. It had a declaratory act in 1766, 10 years before the Declaration. And in that declaratory act, they made this statement. They said they were taking back the Stamp Act, but they were putting forth this act for the better securing of dependency on His Majesty's dominions in America and upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain. And they had this statement, which you see written throughout history. They said, but we have the power to bind the colonies and people of America, subjects of the Crown of Great Britain, in all cases whatsoever. That little phrase, in all cases whatsoever, is repeated in the Declaration of Independence. They had had enough. They knew that it was right, according to Locke and their philosophers that they had studied, to put up with tyranny as long as you can. But there comes a time when you can put up with it no more. Prudence indeed, they said, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such governments and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of governments. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. One of those facts that they had dissolved their legislatures and attempted to bind them in all cases whatsoever. That bill of particulars could be alleged against the federal government today. They have done exactly, even more so, than what the King of Great Britain had done, George III. And if such a bill of particulars lied today, what would it say? They have destroyed our industries. It's senseless treaties like NAFTA and CAFTA, all in the name of free trade. They have opened our borders to criminals, drugs, and even terrorists in violation of the immigration laws. They have undermined our education system with policies like in the Republican administration, No Child Left Behind, and in the Obama administration, A Race to the Top, a $4.35 billion program. But that's not all they're doing. And there's a $5.6 billion investing in innovation, teacher incentives, statewide longitudinal data systems. I like that because they're trying to track kids from preschool all the way through college. Title I school improvements. And yet there is no authority in the Constitution for any of these things. There's no authority to spend $10 billion on education that they have no authority over. You know, I figured it out, $31.5 million. It would take 32 years to build $1 billion. They're suggesting $10 billion. That's $31.5 million, 320 years to reach $1 billion. This insanity has got to be stopped. They've routinely disregarded our Constitution in favor of foreign law, unratified treaties, and the feelings of justices. You know, this feeling of justices is not a new thing. It goes back many, many years. In 1857, in the case of Dred Scott, when they said that slaves were property, one justice from Connecticut, Benjamin Curtis, stood up and said, when a strict interpretation of the Constitution according to the fixed rules which govern the interpretation of laws is abandoned, and the theoretical opinions of individuals are allowed to control its meaning, we have no longer a Constitution. We're under a government of individual men who, for the time being, have the power to declare what the Constitution is according to their own views of what they think it ought to mean. That's what they're doing from the judge's perspective in our Constitution today. They're not even going by the words. The president and executive branch is not going by the words. The Congress is not going by the words. We've got to go back to the Constitution. They've interfered with our... They've interfered with the free enterprise system, seizing private businesses and firing CEOs like in GM and taking over banks like the Bank of America. That's what they've done, but look what they're trying to do. They're trying to control our climate. Policies like cap and trade to restrict carbon emissions, thinking they can control the weather. And when they don't get their job, they respond with, at least Obama did, with a curt smile and said, I won. Well, they didn't get their way, and then EPA filed endangerment findings. Alabama has joined some 8 other states in federal court, but we shouldn't have to go to federal court, prove something that they have no right to. They have no authority over the weather. Another thing they've tried to do, which is dying a slow, painful death for some, is the health care system, where they tried to take over 1/6 of our economy. No authority to do that, and to tell people they either had to buy health care or be subject to a fine and penalty. They distorted the Commerce Clause to regulate anything they want to regulate, and the General Welfare Clause to give away their money in any way they want, $3 billion to Acorn. And how many millions and millions of dollars to representatives in Senate to change their vote? When we're allowing our money to be spent for our representatives to change their vote, something's wrong in America. How far will we let them go before we wake up? The president recently suggested doing away with the BCS, the Bowl Championship Series, in favor of playoffs. Now, I can understand that, but you see, it's not about feelings. When we're standing and listening to a man talk about interfering with games like football, how far will we let them go before we get back to the Constitution of the United States? It's not about feelings. As I recited that from the Declaration of Independence, I used the word usurpation and tyranny. There's a difference. Usurpation is taking of a right to which another hath a right to. Separation of checks and balances, separation of powers in the Constitution. When the one department takes the rights of power from another, it's a usurpation. But tyranny is taking of right which no man has a right to. What we believe, what we think about God is something that neither the federal nor the state government have a right to. Madison, in his memorial remonstrance, said this: "The preservation of a free government requires not merely that the metes and bounds which separate each department of power may be invariably maintained, but more especially that neither of them be suffered to overleap the great barrier which defends the rights of the people. The rulers who are guilty of such an encroachment exceed the commission from which they derive their authority and are tyrants. The people who submit to it are governed by laws made neither by themselves nor by an authority derived from them, and are slaves." In 2002, in the state of Alabama, the federal courts did exactly that. They tried to take something that neither the federal government nor the state government has a right to take, and that's a right to acknowledge God. Every state constitution acknowledges God. I have a short video clip that was not meant to be seen. I don't know how many of you have ever seen it, but it was not meant to be displayed because the federal court and even the state court had restricted any audio or visual transcription of the trial. This trial was before the Court of the Judiciary, before a state court. The prosecutor has now been elevated to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. They did not want you to see what the real issue in America is, what the first right is and must be. And that's a belief in God, because from God, all our rights proceed. So I'm going to show you this, and I hope it... Who is going to operate the video?
And if you resume your duties as Chief Justice after this proceeding, you will continue to acknowledge God as you have testified that you would today,
Absolutely.
no matter what any other official says.
Absolutely. Without, if I can clarify that, without an acknowledgement of God, I cannot do my duty. I must acknowledge God. It says so in the Constitution of Alabama. It says so in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. It says so in everything I've read. So
the only point I'm trying to clarify, Mr. Chief Justice, is not why, but only that, in fact, if you do resume your duties as Chief Justice, you will continue to do that without regard to what any other official says. Isn't that right?
Well, I will do the same thing this court did in starting with prayer. That's an acknowledgement of God. I would do the same thing that justices do when they place their hand on the Bible and say, "So help me God." It's an acknowledgement of God. The Alabama Supreme Court opens with, "God save the state and this honorable court." It's an acknowledgement of God. In my opinions, which I've written many opinions, acknowledging God is the source, a moral source of our law. I think you must.
Amen.
During the trial of this matter, Chief Justice maintained his defiance, testifying that he stood by an earlier statement given by him to the Judicial Inquiry Commission, in which he stated in part, "I did what I did because I upheld my oath, and that's what I did. So I have no apologies for it. I would do it again." The Chief Justice showed no signs of contrition for his actions. Because of the magnitude of the decision with regard to sanctions for the Chief Justice's violation of the canons of judicial ethics was a difficult one for this court to make. Finding no other viable alternatives, this court hereby orders that Roy S. Moore be removed from his position of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama. This court is now adjourned.
Now, I'm not here to defend all this that went on in Alabama. It's in the book that I'll have outside if you want to purchase it. You don't have to purchase it. I'm not here to sell books. But what I'm here to tell you is that has much to do with the 10th Amendment, which says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, comma, or to the people. There are some powers that neither the state nor the federal government has power over. Fortunately, or by God's blessing, most of the states recognize God in their Constitution, recognize the freedom of conscience given to us and protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The federal government is violating that with impunity, and it should be stopped. That was not a loss. It was a great victory. For once, we stood up and told the federal government, we will not bow down to your God. For years, the federal government has removed religious symbols, prohibited prayers in our states, prohibited prayers in our football games, allowed other religious displays in exclusion of Christianity. Now Barack Obama has made the statement that we're no longer a Christian nation. And in fact, if you look at the population, we're one of the largest Muslim countries in the world. What shall we do then? Well, I submit that we do exactly what Obama says we should do. Don't quit. He said, I don't quit, neither should we. In words of that great American statesman that's been mentioned here, Patrick Henry, in St. John's Church on March 23rd, 1775, they were in the same predicament we are here today. Many people outside these walls are not sold yet. They don't understand. They're willing to keep petitioning and keep petitioning, which will do no good. The time has come for action. Patrick Henry stood up and he said, the question before us is one of awful moment for our country. I submit that the question before us today is one of awful moment for our country. What will we do with the 10th Amendment? What will we take a stand, as Ray McBerry and others have done? And I appreciate all these candidates. I have been very motivated, very encouraged to see that people from all across our country are finally waking up to what's going on under the Constitution. When I went to graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. When I went to Vietnam and became an officer and went to Vietnam, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. When I was sworn in as a deputy district attorney, I took the same oath as a judge and then as a chief justice. Throughout my life, I've sworn to uphold the Constitution, and that's what I did. This pamphlet is the Constitution that I published at the Supreme Court. And I've carried this around, and it's marked up, and I still don't know enough about it, but I can always learn. And that's what we need to do. It's an education process. And with people like Ray McBerry and these candidates, they do need your support. They do need it, and they deserve it, because they're running against the same mountain of obstacles that I run against. In my campaign, 3 people have contributed over $5 million to their campaign, and yet I still lead in the polls, because God is working. God is working in our country, and He is still with us, and we need to take action. For my part, I consider it nothing short of a question of freedom or slavery. Should I keep back, and should you keep back your opinions at such a time as this? We should consider ourselves guilty of treason toward our country and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which we revere above all earthly kings. It is natural for man to indulge in illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against the painful truth and listen to the song of the siren till she has destroyed us and turned us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men engaged in the great and arduous struggle for freedom? Are we disposed to be of the number who having eyes see not, who having ears hear not the things which so nearly concern our temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it might cost, I'm willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst and to provide for it. I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by judging the past. And judging by the past, I ask you, what has been in the conduct of the American government in the last 10 years that justify those hopes which some gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves? Is it that insidious smile for which our petitions have been lately received? I submit that there is no longer room for hope. We can't sit down. We can't lie supinely on our back. We must act. We must stand up. And that's what these men and women who are running for these positions are doing. They're standing up and putting their lives and their families and everything on the line to stand up for the people of their state and their counties and their districts. And I appreciate that. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolable those inestimable privileges for which we have so long contended, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, then we must fight. I say again, we must fight. An appeal to the God of hosts is all that is left us. Amen. They tell us that we're weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and a UN guard is stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our back and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we're not weak if we make proper use of the means which the God of nature has placed in our power. 3 million people armed in the holy cause of liberty. And in such a country as that which we possess, and we have many more than 3 million, are invincible by any force which the enemy can set against us. We shall not fight our battles alone. There's a just God who presides over the destinies of nations who will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. Amen. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, and the brave. And we have no election. If we were base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking can be heard in the halls of Congress. And let it come. The war is inevitable. Let it come. This is not necessarily a war to be fought with guns and knives and cannons. This is a war over our Constitution, and we're on the right side. We're on the side of our forefathers and the side that they determined was best for our country. The federal government has simply gone their own way. It is in vain to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Henry ended with those famous lines that he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." That's the kind of attitude we've got to take. That's what we've got to do. We've got to put our lives on the line. I appreciate one of the candidates said that he's not doing this for himself. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for my children, my grandchildren. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear? Was peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Thank you.